I would recommend you, if you have multiple desktops, to work with a lot of references all the time. Always try to preview your references and then check in with your groom. So here we will drop a HairGen node just connected to the skin. Keep in mind the skin is on the left input and not on the middle input as it is for normal groom nodes. So I can switch this over to previewing the points so I can see what's being generated. Doesn't seem to be very visible, so we will adjust our viewport settings by pressing D in the viewport anywhere. And here we can put this to a dark node, disable the templated look, and here we can also adjust the width settings, so I will always push this to a higher value so I can actually see what's going on with my guides. For normal groom nodes, you have a skin VDB connection, but for this one, you don't have that. So I will switch this over to the grooming template, which is pretty redundant because you have to set up your background again by pressing D in the viewport. Also switch out the anti-aliasing settings to a higher value so you can see your hair better. Over the interface, you can drag in the curve advec node that will just drop in these 4 nodes into your workspace. And I will just disconnect them and connect them to my generated HairGen. And connect the surface there. And here in the draw curves, you can disable the show guide geometry option there because we're already previewing our skin. I will quickly do a test and see if my curves is being read. And you can see that our hair is being deformed by the stroke that we were just drawing on the projected surface. And it comes with a mirror automatically. You can disable that if you need to. What I like to use for references is this quadro. In multiple images, which is pretty helpful if you want to work on a character quick and you don't want to spend hours of setting up the cameras before you start working. So yeah, you can set up the options over the little icon there. And especially when it comes to guide work, I like to work with references, but unfortunately this image that I have for the shapes, it doesn't have a very high resolution. So I would recommend you to obviously for hair, you always need to have a lot of information. And for productions, we usually work with photo shootings. I'm creating a camera and trying to match it to the image I have on the right. But yeah, in productions, we usually work with scanned data if we have like a likeness of a digital double or even creatures. So your character model always comes with a scan setup with ready images that are aligned with cameras already. So when you paint your guide strokes, you always know where you need to paint them, and instead of guessing where to paint them. We'll also go with a higher focal length. It's probably even higher, judging by the image. But yeah, and then I will start assigning the strokes. It's usually a very slow process. You will just have to see how the directionality is in your reference, and then you can adjust it. So I will speed this up a little bit here. The good thing about Houdini is very open. You can always go back and adjust the density, etc. And it's very procedural. So here we'll bring up another reference with more resolution, so I have a better image I can work with. Also, you can speed it up by adding a resample on your curves, so you're passing on less points than you did before. There are also options to basically adjust the curve advect, and you can make it sharper in the transition between the curves or softer, depending on your character. But yeah, I will just leave this at default at the moment, as I'm still developing the curve direction. The length and the volume or the lift of the character, but we will do this as a separate step. So we will just basically put emphasis on the directionality at the moment at this stage here. The curve advect is usually only great if you have shorter hair, like Peach for medium hair. Sometimes I use it for medium hair when I need to have a first directionality, and then I will go in and adjust every guide singular. At this stage, I can see that some of the hairs are being spawned inside of the mouth areas. So what I need to do is I need to go back into the skin parameters and adjust my no hair map to paint out all these hairs there. And usually I will just dive inside the character and paint a little X where I think the area is that I want to paint out. And then you can switch over to UV view and search for your little X, and then you can see which shell you need to paint out. At this stage, I'm not too sure which shells are belonging to the moth and which not, so I see one of them is the ear, so I will just revert that. The good thing about Houdini is you can assign almost every color to every type of node. You can change the shape, you can organize it in very nice ways. So a lot of people I know from companies I work with have like very defined color rules of, especially in template setups. But it's nice if you work with templates and if you want people to use the same templates as you do and be able to understand what other people are doing. I think it's a very good thing to do. So yeah, and I'm a little bit annoyed about this output node here. I don't want to switch it over all the time, so I will build a switch. What a switch does, it lets you basically change the inputs and combine them into one stream. We'll call this isolate head, with the default 0 being no head isolated and 1 being an isolated head. And yeah, we'll start creating a checkbox on the skin level here. And it's called a toggle. So just drag that over. And I will assign it a name. It's similar to the bind map. Able to work with that on the object level. Oh yeah, now it's time to finally start our hair generate. Usually when I'm working on guides, I already have my hair generate active with like basic clumps assigned. That way you can make sure that you have enough guides assigned in your guide gen and see if everything has the correct length, if everything is being picked up correctly. Yeah, just disable the display as subdivision curves to keep everything performant. And you can see it just basically generates some peach fuzz. It doesn't pick up our guides, so something is wrong. And here you have to connect the output nodes to your right now I will kill this because it's, I think, by default set to 2000, which is burning my computer. I like to write an expression that basically randomizes the thickness a little bit more and clamps them into one value that you can work with. But yeah, we will set that up later. First of all, let's try to match the density. And I also like to increase the influence radius to 0.5 most of the times. If you're working with density maps, it shouldn't be an issue. If you aren't working with density maps, you might see that your regions are being extended. But yeah, if you're working with attributes, that shouldn't be an issue. Here, and write the randomized expression. So there's a randomized expression that basically picks a random number of the attribute that you give it in that very instance, and I will give it the primitive number, which would be any type of number that my hair provides. And I will also clamp that, and I will basically assign like a random number based on the primitive ID, and then I will clamp that in a fit function. It's currently set to minimum input, maximum input, minimum output, maximum output, and I will assign it to 0.01 as a maximum output and as a minimum output 0.05, 0.05, and that way you can get a randomized number. You can also see it generated some zero with hair, which we will get rid of later on. So that way we have a different width value. We don't have the same width value to every single hair assigned. We have a lot of variance, which will make it look more natural. Inside of the hair, what I like to do is I like to assign a different color based on the ID number of the hair itself, and I will have to set this to primitive instead of point. So it will pick up a different color for each primitive, for each hair in this case. And if we switch this over, we can see that it becomes very colorful. But yeah, usually when I groom characters, I always switch between this preview and plain color preview before I hit rendering. So I always work with these settings until 70% ready, and then I will switch over to rendering and always compare back and forth what I need to do in the grooming in order to match it better. I think it's a very important step to always work with rendering at some points and not completely rely on the viewport in Houdini. Shading is also a huge issue. It can look very different with different shading attributes. We can see that there's a lot of intersections between the eyebrows. In order to fix them, we will use the Guide Collide VDB. I wouldn't recommend you using that at the beginning of the diagram. I would rather use that at the end. But at the moment, we want to see how it looks like. So in productions, I usually work with that for a while, and then I will disable that or kill that off and put it at the end of the graph. It's a very heavy node. That's why you don't want to basically add all this heaviness in the beginning yet. And here you have to be careful with the values because sometimes it can add a lot of volume, especially at the nose bridge where you don't want to have this type of volume. So don't go overboard with pushing it out too far. Otherwise it can look very unrealistic. But yeah, I think that's a good value. It doesn't push it out too far. And at this stage, I also like to experiment a little bit with the extrude and blend settings and the linear blending methods. It really depends on your character. Sometimes influence decay level, so I can still get this patchy look, but more turned down. In that sense, and on the other setting, the nose bridge comes through in a more weirder way. I will also check in with my reference what will look better. I also like to turn down my relaxed iterations. What they're doing is they feather out the distribution of the roots a little bit more, or the primitives being generated. If you have higher levels, everything will be more regular, but it will also take almost 3 times the amount of performance time. So I like to keep that, to see it with how much I can get away without looking too shabby at this stage. And I also have a look into different seeds. But yeah, most likely I will change that till the last minute. I will also go